This is Patrick Dolans with the second presentation on the circular flow model. In the first presentation, we built the basic circular flow model, including a factor market and a product market. We also introduced the key identity that total income is always exactly equal to total output. And out of this identity, we discovered the implication that in order for firms to sell all of the products they produce, all the income that's generated must be spent. As we concluded the first presentation, I suggested that that last final requirement that all income must be spent is not realistic and doesn't describe the macroeconomy that we know and live in. That's the basis for this presentation. In this presentation, we're going to explore the things that happen to household income besides consumption or consumer spending, and we're going to explore the alternative sources of spending that make up for it. Out of this, we'll construct the complete circular flow model. We begin by looking at the things that households do besides spend their income on domestically produced goods and services. We will refer to these choices as leakages from the circular flow. There are three kinds of leakages. The first leakage is savings. When households choose to set aside a portion of their income in the form of savings, that income does not get spent, and therefore it leaks out of the circular flow model. In our story, we'll assume that savings go into financial institutions. The second leakage is taxes. As the various levels of government, state, local, federal, impose taxes upon citizens, that represents an alternative use of income that is neither household consumption nor savings. Taxes in our model will flow out of households and into government. The third and final leakage is known as imports. Imports represent goods and services that were produced outside of our economy, but that represent a source of spending from households that doesn't remain within our circular flow. When households purchase imports, goods and services made elsewhere, those dollars leak out of the model into a box that I call the rest of the world, ROW. You can think of rest of the world as a series of other circular flow models for other economies. China, United Kingdom, Mexico, Canada, etc. When we take these three concepts of leakages and put them into the diagram, we get something like this. Notice that the presence of these leakages almost guarantees that the condition we established at the end of the last presentation will not be met. If households receive $1 million worth of income as firms produce $1 million worth of output, but households choose to save some portion of the million, government taxes some portion of the million, and some portion of the million leaves our economy in pursuit of goods and services produced elsewhere, then households will definitely spend less than $1 million on the output. But if the output was $1 million and households are spending less than that, we know that firms will start to accumulate inventories. That may not be a problem in the short term, but if that happens month after month, year after year, the stockpiles, sooner or later, will motivate business firms to cut back production. And one of the key insights of this model is that as production gets cut, so does income. If firms cut production back to 800,000 instead of $1 million, then households will only earn $800,000. And in that $800,000 of income, there will still be decisions to save, there will still be taxes imposed, and there will almost certainly be dollars spent on goods and services produced elsewhere, which means that firms can't sell 800,000, so they cut again. But each time they cut, They reduce jobs, reduce income, and reduce future consumption. As you visualize this description, perhaps you begin to understand our very primitive model of a recession. In this story, as I'm telling it right now, an economy would spiral downward and downward and downward, with output and income shrinking in successive rounds as firms found that they consistently and chronically produced too much stuff. Fortunately, that doesn't describe the world that we live in as the norm, and so there's something missing. In fact, the diagram suggests there's something not quite complete. What's missing? Well, households are not the only economic agents that spend in our economy. So now we're going to introduce something known as injections into the circular flow model. Injections refer to the categories of non-household spending. That is to say, the other components of our economy that purchase goods and services from businesses. The first injection is known as investment. This is the word you want to be very careful with, because when I say think about investment, most students, most people tend to think about categories of savings. Stock market activity, rare coins or works of art, buying real estate that you think will become more valuable in the future. Those all sound like investments, but none of those represent the category of investment that we are looking at. In our model, investment refers to business spending that represents future sales. Business spending that represents future sales is now going to supplement household consumption as a source of demand for those goods and services that were produced. The second injection is known as government spending. Just as government taxes at the various levels, state, local, and federal, government also spends. Local governments spend on schools and road repair. State governments spend on highways, hospitals, that sort of thing, colleges and universities. And the federal government spends as well. Those dollars spent by various government entities represent another form of demand for the goods and services produced, and so they will inject spending back into the circular flow. And then finally, our third category of an injection is known as exports. Exports refer to the goods and services that we sell to the rest of the world, attracting back dollars into the circular flow model. As you can see, if businesses finance investment from borrowing and other kinds of financial transactions at financial institutions, if the government spending comes out of the government coffers that collected taxes, and if exports are sent to the rest of the world, then the injections element of the diagram mimics what we saw on the leakages side. We now have our complete circular flow model. The complete circular flow model captures the various flows of money and goods and services within our economy. This complete circular flow diagram is the one that you should be the most familiar with. Let's return back to the implications piece that we uncovered at the end of the first presentation. I suggested that if total income is exactly equal to total output, and if all products made are in fact sold, then income must equal sales. I also suggested that income must equal sales could be rephrased a little more effectively as all income must be spent. While that was true in the basic circular flow model, the story has become complicated. Or if you will, the smiley face now has a nose and ears and eyebrows. Now that we have leakages and injections in the story, every dollar of income that is not spent by households must be matched by some other form of spending. Another way to say that is the total leakages, the total numerical value of the three leakages combined must match the total value of total injections numerically, if all products made are sold. Notice this doesn't have to happen, but this is necessary if we want to achieve our desired condition of a macroeconomic equilibrium, or a stable situation where businesses will continue to do tomorrow what they did yesterday. As we start to wrap up this presentation, let's think briefly about the relationship between leakages and injections. In fact, there are three and only three possibilities. The first possibility is that numerically the total leakages exceed the total injections. The second possibility is that numerically the leakages add up to a number that is less than the total of the injections. And finally, if neither of these first two situations are true, then we know it must be the case that numerically the value of total leakages exactly matches the value of total injections. What are the consequences of these three scenarios? Well, in the first case, if the leakages exceed the injections, then we have a situation where the total value of spending does not match the value of output produced, and that can have recessionary implications in this model. When we say recession, we're thinking of contracting economies, reduced economic activity, reduced output, rising unemployment, reduced income. The second possibility is that we have lots more injection than we do leakage. In this situation, we have too much spending, and so in this model, the consequence of too much spending is likely to be inflation. That is to say, if we have way more spending than can keep up with the output that was produced. Okay, let me try that again. If the output that is produced is less than all the spending that people want to do, firms will respond by raising prices, more or less across the board, and that's what we mean by inflation. The third and final possibility was that leakages and injections match, and for that outcome, we're going to use the term equilibrium to describe a stable, smooth path where the future looks more or less like the past and the present. This concludes our exploration of the circular flow model.